This trail only appears at 3:17 a.m. They told me the Bitterroot Range had its secrets. That's what every backwoods ranger hears when they sign the dotted line, get their clearance badge, and get shipped out to some lonely station where the only voices you hear after dark are your own, and maybe a coyote's if you're lucky. But I didn't think secrets could breathe. My name's Eli. I'm a ranger assigned to the western Montana sector of the Bitterroot National Forest, just outside a little blip of a town called Darby. It's cold, damp, and empty 9 months out of the year. Tourists roll through during summer and fall to hike, fish, take selfies with rented gear from REI. Then they vanish once the frost comes crawling back. But I stay. Always have. I wasn't looking for adventure, just peace and solitude. The kind you only get in a place where cell service dies 5 miles in and the trees swallow your voice whole. My station sits on a forgotten patch of land not even listed on Google Maps. Officially, it's called Post 49. Unofficially, we call it the End. My cabin's about 10 minutes from the main ranger outpost, deep enough in the brush that elk sometimes press their noses against the windows at night. Power's inconsistent, but the wood stove's reliable, and I've got a stack of old National Geographics that never seem to run out. No neighbors, no traffic, just silence and pine needles. Everything changed last Thursday. I was 3 days into a solo patrol, just clearing trails and making sure no dumbass campers tried building a fire under the dry brush. Hiked the Fork Ridge Trail like usual, recorded some minor rockslide damage, and was heading back when I noticed a small detour path I didn't recognize. It looked wrong, not new. That's the thing. Just off, like it didn't belong. The trees around it were spaced too perfectly. The soil was disturbed, but not recently, like it had been trampled years ago and left to rot. There were no blazes on the trees, no ranger marks, no sign of man-made anything. And the trailhead had no name, just a wooden stake hammered into the ground with a crudely carved number, 317. Not Trail 317, just the numbers like a time. I stood there a while, longer than I should have, just staring at that stake. I checked my watch. It was 1 p.m., so I shrugged it off. Probably some kids being clever, or maybe an old hunter's path long since abandoned. But when I mentioned it to Jay, the other ranger covering the northern routes, he went real quiet. "You saw it?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "The 317 marker." "Yeah." He looked at me like I just told him I dug up my grandmother. He didn't laugh, didn't ask more, just said, "Don't go near it. If you see it again, turn around. Seriously, Eli." I thought he was screwing with me. I even laughed a little. But he didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that trail. It was like a splinter in my brain. I lay awake in the cabin, windows creaking, stove popping, wind sliding under the cracks in the walls. The forest was louder than usual. Then I heard it. A whistle. Not a bird, not the wind. A human whistle. 3 short bursts coming from somewhere near the tree line. I grabbed my flashlight and jacket, boots unlaced, heart pounding. I stepped outside and scanned the forest. Snow was coming in sideways, flakes already clinging to my sleeves. No footprints, no lights, just trees. Then about 50 feet into the woods, I saw something. A dim glow, faint, like someone holding up their phone flashlight behind a tree. It was low to the ground, flickering slightly. I called out, "Hey, you all right? You lost?" No answer, just the whistle again. 3 short bursts. I should have called it in. I should have woken Jay, logged the sighting, followed protocol. But I didn't. I walked toward it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. My boots breaking crusted snow, breath in clouds. When I reached the tree where the glow had been, there was nothing there. No light, no tracks, nothing. But right next to the trunk, half buried in the snow, was another stake. Same size, same look. Carved into it, barely legible through the frost, 317. It was 3:12 a.m. The cold wasn't what made my hands shake. I stared at the stake like it might start moving on its own. The way the numbers were carved, they looked rushed. Not whittled by some bored hiker or a kid with a pocket knife. They were uneven, gouged in like whoever did it was in a hurry, or scared, or both. I bent down and touched the wood. It was wet, not snow wet. fresh wet, like it had just been hammered into the ground minutes ago. And I swear to God, the air around it felt warmer, like something was leaking heat into the freezing forest. That's when my radio crackled. "Eli, you up?" Jay's voice, staticky but sharp. I snatched the mic off my belt, eyes still on the stake. "Yeah, I'm outside the cabin." Pause. "Then you see it again?" I hesitated. There's another marker, same numbers, out near the eastern tree line. It wasn't here before. Another long pause. Go back inside. "Jay, what the hell is this? Some kind of prank? You screwing with me?" "No, I'm not screwing with you." "Listen, I've seen that trail before too. Twice. First time I followed it, I lost a full hour like time just skipped. Second time I heard someone whisper my name. But I was alone. Jesus, Eli, listen to me real careful. If you ever see the trail, not just the stake, the actual trail, and it's exactly 3:17, you need to leave immediately. Don't look back. Don't speak to anyone you see on it. Just leave. Run if you have to." My mouth went dry. "But what is it? Is it some nut job screwing with us? Meth heads?" "No," Jay said, his voice low now. "It's not people. I don't think it ever was." I didn't respond. I just slowly backed away from the stake, still feeling the heat rising off it like a vent in the snow. That night, I barely slept. I kept all the lights on, even the porch light that flickered and made a faint buzzing noise like a dying fly. I kept the radio on channel 1 with the volume low. No new calls came in, just wind, occasionally slicing through the trees like nails dragging across aluminum. At 3:17 a.m., I watched the clock. Nothing happened. No sounds, no light, no whistle. Until about 10 minutes later, when the motion sensor out back clicked on, I froze. Something or someone was out there. I grabbed my flashlight again, heart now thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and stepped out the back door. The snow was thicker now, up to my ankles, and the sky had this weird reddish tint from the cloud cover, like a dying sunset, even though it was pitch black. My breath fogged in front of me as I scanned the backyard. The sensor light buzzed overhead, just trees, a few fallen branches, my old woodpile. Then I saw it, bare footprints in the snow. They weren't mine. I hadn't come out this way. They led from the edge of the tree line to the back porch, barefoot. No shoes, no socks, no boot marks, just toes pressed deep into the snow, almost like someone had been dragged barefoot. And worse, they stopped at the base of the porch, but there was no one there. I followed them backward, flashlight beam jittering in my hands. 20 feet. 40. They disappeared right at the trees. That's when I smelled it. Something sweet. Too sweet. Like hot syrup gone rancid. It was thick in the air. It clung to my nose and mouth and made my stomach twist. I turned around, ready to book it back inside, when I caught something out of the corner of my eye, off to the left, barely visible through the snow-laced branches. A shape. Not moving, just watching. It was tall, at least 6'5", skinny, slouched, with one shoulder higher than the other, like it was dislocated. I couldn't make out a face. It was backlit by the porch light, but I could see the gleam of its eyes, reflective, like an animal's. I stood frozen. My flashlight didn't work when I aimed it at him, no joke. The second I pointed the beam toward that figure, the light died. I shook it, slapped it, nothing. Then it spoke. Not loud, not a yell. Just a soft, rattling voice. "You came too early." I ran, slipped once, cut my palm on a rock hidden under the snow, scrambled up, bolted into the cabin. I slammed the door, locked it, and pushed the dresser in front. I sat there in the dark with my ears ringing and blood drying on my hand. When I worked up the nerve to look out the back window again, the motion light was off. The footprints were gone. The snow was untouched, like no one had ever been there. But on the glass, right where my face had been earlier, someone had written in the fog. I called in sick the next morning. Told dispatch I was running a fever, maybe the flu, and wouldn't be on patrol. That wasn't a lie. I felt like hell. Couldn't keep coffee down. Vision blurry. Like I was jet-lagged in my own skin. But it wasn't illness. It was dread. The kind that seeps in under your fingernails and makes your bones feel too tight inside your body. I sat on the edge of my cot for what felt like hours. just staring at the window. Half of me expected to see that slouched figure still out there, waiting in the tree line. The other half, it was starting to want to see him again, like a sick part of me was trying to explain it away. Maybe it was just a crazy hiker. Maybe I imagined the voice. Maybe stress was finally breaking me down. Maybe I'd finally turned into one of those guys who loses it up here in the mountains. That evening, I drove into town. Darby's not much more than a few blinking lights and a Chevron with overpriced beef jerky, but it's got a dive bar, the Blue Lantern. And that night, I needed something stronger than caffeine. I took a stool near the back and ordered a double whiskey. No ice. The bartender, a woman named Jessa I'd known for a few years, raised an eyebrow. Long shift? Something like that. You look like, feel worse. She poured the glass without another word. I sat there sipping slow, trying to decide if I was going to ask anyone about 317. I didn't even know how I'd bring it up. Hey, anyone else seeing ghost trails in the woods? But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw an old guy sitting alone at a booth facing the window. Long gray beard, flannel jacket. Eyes like cigarette ash, dull but burning at the edges. I'd seen him before. Locals called him Cappy, short for captain. Even though he'd never served a day in the military. Just spent 30 years working fire watch towers up north, way deeper into the woods than even we were allowed to patrol. Now, Cappy only ever came into town when the snow hit hard. They said he didn't believe in phones, didn't trust electricity. Claimed the mountains could hear you if you spoke too loud near a power line. That night, after my second whiskey, I worked up the nerve and sat down across from him. He didn't look at me, just sipped his beer. You ever hear of a trail marked 317? I asked quietly. That got his attention. His eyes flicked to mine, cold and flat. Where'd you see it? He said. I didn't say I saw it. You did. I hesitated. Eastern Ridge, near Post 49. He nodded slowly, tapped his fingers on the table like he was counting heartbeats. Shouldn't be looking for that one, he said. Shouldn't be noticing it at all. Not unless it's looking for you. What is it? He looked out the window. The wind was blowing fine snow through the streetlights, making it look like ash falling from a skyfire. You ever been walking in the woods and thought you heard someone behind you? You look, no one there, but the sound keeps coming like it's pacing you. Just out of step. Yeah, it's not your imagination. I waited. He didn't go on. What happens if you go down the trail? He licked his lips. His voice dropped lower. Depends on what it wants to show you. That doesn't make any sense. It's not supposed to. He leaned forward. Some say it's where the forest buries the things it can't digest. Sins, secrets, whatever people drop off the map. Hikers that went missing, hunters that never came back, cops that went quiet after chasing someone too far. The trail picks them up, sucks them in, rearranges them, sends back only what it wants you to see. I wanted to call bullshit, but something in the way he said it, quiet, steady, not trying to scare me, made me swallow my doubt. And the time, 3:17, he said. That's when the forest's heartbeat changes. You can't hear it, but you feel it. That's when it opens up, like a wound. I asked him one last question. Have you been down it? He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window again, then whispered, My wife went missing in 1998, disappeared during an early morning hike outside Missoula. No note, no gear, just gone. He turned back to me. I saw her last winter at 3:17, smiling at me from the trail, same way she looked the day she left, except her eyes were all wrong. She didn't blink, just waited. I never went closer. I think if I had, I wouldn't have come back. He stood up without another word and left his drink half full. I didn't sleep that night. But at 3:17 a.m., I did wake up. My clock didn't beep. My phone didn't buzz. I just opened my eyes at exactly 3:17, like something touched the inside of my skull. I got up and walked to the window. The forest was dark, quiet, but in the distance, near the path where I'd found the second stake, there was a dim light again. This time, it moved. It bobbed slowly side to side like someone holding a lantern and walking deeper into the woods. I watched it until it disappeared into the trees. And I swear I heard a voice, low, whispery, full of static and sorrow, calling my name. Eli. I stayed inside the next 2 days, didn't go on patrol, didn't answer the radio. I just sat in that goddamn cabin with the blinds drawn, the stove cold, and a loaded 9mm on the table next to my hand. I barely ate, just sipped lukewarm coffee and stared at the tree line. I kept telling myself I was just tired. I hadn't been sleeping right. I'd had too much whiskey. I was letting old-timer ghost stories and forest folklore crawl into my head like termites. But I couldn't stop thinking about that light in the woods and that voice. It didn't just say my name. It knew it, like someone who'd known me a long time. A voice you don't question. And that was the part that really messed with me, because it almost made me want to follow it. Just to see. Just to make it stop. On the third day, Jay showed up. I heard the crunch of boots on gravel outside my cabin and peeked through the blinds. His Bronco was parked sideways near the old firewood shed, engine still running, headlights cutting into the snow. He didn't knock, just stood out front like he was waiting for me to come to him. I opened the door a crack. He looked like hell, beard untrimmed, eyes red, lips chapped from the cold. He was holding something in a black garbage bag. "You gotta see this," he said, voice tight. I let him in, stepped aside without saying a word. He moved like someone who hadn't slept either. Sat the bag down on the table next to my pistol and unzipped it. Inside was a Ranger backpack. Not just any pack. Ours. Standard issue. Patch for Bitterroot Forest on the front pocket. ID tag still attached. Name on it read K. Barlow. I felt my stomach drop. Kenny Barlow had gone missing last spring. Young guy, only 6 months into the job. Sweet kid, a little green, always carried a stupid flask shaped like a fish. He was supposed to do a simple solo patrol, trail maintenance, nothing off-path, never came back. Search and rescue ran for 10 days. Dogs, drones, ground teams, no signs, nothing. Everyone figured he slipped on the rocks near one of the ridges and got pulled down into the ravines. The forest has places where even vultures don't bother looking. "Where the hell did you find this?" I asked. Jay didn't speak right away. Just unzipped the main pouch and dumped the contents onto the table. A small notebook, a plastic compass, cracked, a few empty granola wrappers, and a handheld GPS, completely dead. But the real thing, the part that froze my blood, was a map. A hand-drawn trail map, smeared and bent, with one path circled in red ink. No name, just a time written underneath it in shaky letters. Jay finally spoke. His voice was raw. I was out near Coldwater Creek, just north of the Ridge Trail. Wasn't looking for anything, just needed air. Something felt off, like the trees were watching. I nodded slowly. Then I saw this little cut path down the side of a hill, steep, narrow, barely wide enough for one boot. I don't know why I followed it. I just did. He looked at me, eyes wide. Felt like something needed me to. That phrase, it stuck in my head. Needed me to, he went on. Trail went maybe 40, 50 feet. Then it just stopped. Dead end. But sitting there propped up against a boulder like someone had gently placed it was the bone dry, no snow on it, no dirt, like it had been set there 5 minutes earlier. I didn't know what to say, so I asked the only thing that made sense. "Do you think he went down the 317 trail?" Jay nodded. "I think he found it, or it found him." We both sat there for a minute, the map between us like a cursed relic. Then Jay looked me dead in the eye. "I don't think Kenny's dead." "What do you mean?" "I think he's somewhere else. Not gone, just caught. Like bait in a trap." I should have laughed. Should have told him to go home, get rest, stop chasing ghost stories. But then he pulled something else from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. A photograph, Polaroid style. Old, bent. It showed a figure standing just off the trail in the woods. Pale face, grimy ranger jacket, eyes hollowed out by shadow, barefoot. But he wasn't smiling. He wasn't waving. He was staring straight into the camera and his mouth was hanging open wide, like he was screaming, only there was no sound. The photo gave me this horrible feeling, like I was looking at something I shouldn't see, like my brain didn't know how to process it. My vision blurred the longer I stared. I pushed it away. Jay leaned in again, whispering now, "There's something down that trail, Eli. Something that shows you what you want, who you lost, but it's not real. It's not them. It's just wearing their skin." The clock ticked loudly in the silence. Jay stood. "I think I'm going to follow it." "What? No, Jay. You saw what happened to Kenny." He cut me off. "If it has him, I need to try. If I wait too long, I don't think I'll be able to resist it anymore. It's pulling at me every night. Same dream, same time. I hear my sister's voice. She died in a car wreck 5 years ago, but on the trail, she sounds alive." He looked at me real soft. "You'll understand soon." Then he walked out the door, leaving the photo, the map, and me behind. I haven't seen Jay since. But now, every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., something knocks on my door 3 times. Always slow, always patient. And then it waits. It started knocking every night, 3 knocks, always at 3:17 on the dot, never a second early, never late, like it knew when I was at my most vulnerable, right at the edge of sleep, body heavy, mind loose, and foggy. That in-between state where dreams smear against the walls of the real world and nothing feels safe. The worst part, it never tried the doorknob, never rattled it, never banged. Just knocked, soft, almost polite, like it was waiting for me to open it willingly. And some nights I almost did. I'd stand there just feet away, hand hovering over the knob, my breath fogging the cold air leaking in through the cracks, my skin crawling because I could feel it on the other side. The presence, it wasn't just a person. Not anymore. It was something stretched into the shape of a man. Something that knew how to mimic human need. One night after the knock, I heard a voice, faint, muffled through the wood, but clear. "Eli, it's me. You left me." It was Jay's voice, and it was broken, like someone had scraped the life out of it with a rusted fork. I didn't open the door, I didn't speak, but I didn't sleep again either. Over the next few days, things inside the cabin got worse. It felt like I was rotting from the inside out. Food tasted wrong, metallic, bitter. My mirror fogged over even when the air was freezing. And my reflection? It started twitching when I didn't. I burned the photo of Kenny. Didn't help. I burned the map next, watched the red ink curl into smoke. The flame turned green for a second, no lie, and the smell was like wet leather left in a trunk full of roadkill. I almost threw up, but still the trail kept calling. It's like it had embedded itself in my brain. Even when I tried to think of normal things, grocery lists, emails I needed to answer, memories of summer nights in college, my mind always drifted back to the same mental image. The forest opening like a mouth, the trail waiting like a throat. I reached out to a retired ranger named Cole, who used to work Bitterroot back in the 80s. I found his number buried in some old ranger database, listed under Emergency Historical Consult. Sounded fake. I called anyway. He answered after 2 rings, didn't even say hello. Just, "You're seeing it now, aren't you?" I didn't know what to say. "Has it come knocking yet?" "Every night." He exhaled sharply. I could hear him lighting a cigarette. "You still in the cabin, post 49? "Yeah." "Burn it." "Excuse me? You heard me. Burn it to the goddamn ground. It can't root if you're not still. You stay in one place too long, it roots. That's how it pulls you in, through dreams, through grief, through regret." He took a drag, coughed. "They won't tell you this officially, but that land was red zoned in 79 before it was Forest Service property. It was privately owned. Logging family disappeared. Whole goddamn house found empty. Dinner still on the plates, lights still on. Search parties went missing. 2 of them turned up naked and smiling with no eyes. Rest were never found." I paced my cabin while he spoke. My boots felt like they were getting heavier. My head was full of bees. "Cole, what is it?" There was a long pause. Then, very quietly, he said, "I think it's something the forest uses, like a trap. It mimics your losses, projects what you wish was still alive, makes you follow it. Then it peels your soul slow, makes you part of the trail. That's why people keep disappearing. They're not dead. They're pieces." My throat went dry. Pieces? Pieces of the damn path. That trail doesn't lead anywhere. It grows every time someone follows it. It gets longer, wider, hungrier. I asked him if he ever saw it. He didn't answer, just hung up. That night, I drank half a bottle of whiskey and sat on the floor with my pistol in my lap. The knocks came again, soft, deliberate. I didn't move, but the voice spoke again. This time it wasn't Jay. It was my dad. He died of a stroke 6 years ago. We weren't on great terms. Last time we spoke, we fought over something stupid. I never got to apologize, never got closure. And now, through the wood, he was whispering, "Son, please, I don't want to be alone anymore." I cried. Not proud of it. I sat there in the dark and wept like a kid, my body shaking, pistol shaking in my hands. Because that's how it works, doesn't it? It doesn't just chase you. It doesn't jump out of the woods with fangs and claws. It waits. It listens. It knows who you miss, what you regret, and it offers them back to you. But wrong, distorted, hollow-eyed and full of something that's wearing their voice like a Halloween mask. At 3:23 a.m., the knocks stopped. At 3:30 a.m., I threw up. Couldn't help it. The smell in the cabin was changing. Faint at first, like hot breath, then stronger, like something dead and wet had crawled up inside the walls. When I checked the door the next morning, there were footprints in the snow, bare human, leading from the forest to my window. Not the door, the window where I sleep. There were fingernail scratches along the wood frame, like someone was trying to pry it open. That was last night. And tonight, the forest is too quiet. No wind, no owls, no branches cracking under elk hooves. It's like it's holding its breath, waiting for me to make a choice. And I think I'm going to follow it. I need to know what it wants. I need to know what happened to Jay, to Kenny, to everyone else. It's taken. I just want to see for myself. The clock says 3:12 a.m. 5 minutes to go. I left the cabin door unlocked just once. My boots were laced, my flashlight loaded with new batteries. Not that it would matter. I strapped my old Ranger knife to my belt. A reflex, not a strategy. You can't cut fog. You can't fight what wears the face of someone you loved. At 3:17 a.m., I stepped outside. The forest was awake. Not loud, not howling, not snapping branches or rustling leaves, but alive in the way a church feels alive when it's empty. And you know you're not alone. Every tree looked straighter, every shadow longer. I didn't hear animals, I didn't even hear wind. Just breathing, distant and slow, like something enormous was asleep beneath the snow, and I was walking across its spine. And then I saw it, the trail. It didn't make sense how it appeared. 1 second there was nothing but untouched snow and pine needles. The next, there it was. Narrow, unnaturally smooth, darker than the dirt around it, like it had been burned into the ground. The trees bent away from it like even they didn't want to touch it. And at the mouth of the trail stood a figure. It looked like Jay. Same coat, same slouched stance, barefoot in the snow, eyes too dark. But he didn't speak. He just turned and walked down the path. And like a goddamn idiot, I followed. Every step I took felt heavier than the last. My body didn't want to go, but my mind kept shoving me forward, like it was being pulled by an invisible hook buried somewhere behind my heart. The trail wound inward. Tight curves, claustrophobic gaps between trees, thorn branches that brushed my cheeks even though they shouldn't have been growing this time of year. The flashlight flickered, then died completely. Didn't matter. The path glowed faintly beneath my feet, like embers under glass. After what felt like 10 minutes or maybe 10 hours, the trail opened into a small clearing. There was no sky above, just a ceiling of mist. And there, waiting in the center, were 6 people, all barefoot, all smiling. Kenny, Jay, my father, a woman I didn't recognize but felt something twist in my gut when I looked at her like I should have known her. And 2 more. One was a child, a little girl. She had no eyes. They didn't move. They just watched me. And then Jay, or the thing wearing Jay's shape, stepped forward. "You came," he said. "We didn't think you would." I tried to speak, but my voice was gone. My throat felt packed with ice. He grinned wider, too wide. "Now you can see." And that's when the others opened their mouths one by one, slow, mechanical. They didn't scream. They played sound like radios, each one whispering a different memory. Voices from my past, twisted and looping, My father drunk saying he was proud of me, Jay laughing about how stupid our job really was, my mother humming a song I hadn't heard since I was 5, my own voice crying at age 9, begging someone not to leave. I dropped to my knees. I covered my ears. It didn't help. The forest wrapped around the sound and shoved it into me anyway, like it wanted to replace my memories, erode the ones I still owned, and feed me a new script, a new identity, a trail-shaped version of me. Jay leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Stay here," he said. "Stay, and you'll never be alone again." I don't know how I did it. Somehow from somewhere I pulled the knife. I didn't stab him. Wouldn't have mattered. I stabbed my own thigh, hard. The pain was white-hot, primal. But it worked. For a second, everything blurred, the figures distorted, the voices warped, and I stumbled backward out of the circle, bleeding and shaking. The trail shifted under my feet, began to dissolve. I didn't walk back. I ran. The snow clawed at my face, branches grabbed my jacket, but the trail collapsed behind me like the world was folding inward. And just before it vanished completely, I looked back. Jay was still standing at the edge of the mist, only now he was smiling with my face. I woke up 2 miles from my cabin. No trail behind me, just snow, just trees. The wound in my leg was real, deep, clotted, stinking of rot, like something from the trail had followed me into my bloodstream. I never went back to the cabin, burned it, like Cole told me, left the forest, moved to Arizona, flatlands, dust, no trees tall enough to whisper. But it didn't fix me. Some nights I still wake up at 3:17 a.m., soaked in sweat, ears ringing with phantom voices, and every so often, not often but enough, I get a call on the emergency park line I keep disconnected in the closet. It's always static, then a soft knock on the line, 3 times. And once, just once, I heard a little girl's voice say, "This trail's almost ready for you again." Whatever it is out there, it's still growing, and it remembers. The morning sun spilled golden light over the rugged peaks of the park, a sprawling expanse of wilderness that had become my charge, my sanctuary, my responsibility. I'd always pictured being a park ranger as a tranquil vocation, a caretaker of nature's grandeur. The job description, however, neglected to mention the moments that would shatter the calm, leaving you with a lingering sense of disquiet that no amount of mountain air could dispel. As I patrolled the familiar trails in my truck, the scent of pine and earth was a constant companion. The park was an untamed thing, both fierce and beautiful, with rivers that carved through the land and forests that whispered secrets. I offered directions to a young couple eager for adventure, their faces alight with the joy of the unexplored. That was part of the job I loved, being a guide to those who sought to lose themselves in nature, if only to find something new within. By midday, I'd made my rounds, checked licenses, shared polite nods with anglers who were more hopeful than successful, and steered day hikers away from paths that were less forgiving than they appeared. It was the routine I relished, a steady rhythm like the ebb and flow of the seasons. Until it wasn't. It was by chance, following the trail of an eagle soaring overhead, that I stumbled upon the campsite. 5 tents stood in a clearing a stone's throw from the trail, their fabric doors zipped tight against intruders of any kind. It struck me as odd, the stillness of it all. By this hour, the occupants should have been up and about, their laughter and chatter mingling with the sounds of the forest. But there was nothing. Only silence. I cleared my throat, the sound harsh in the quiet, and announced myself. "Park Ranger," I called out, expecting the rustle of movement, the emergence of sleepy faces, but the forest held its breath and the silence grew heavier. "Anyone there?" My voice was louder this time, tinged with the unease that crept into my bones. The absence of response weighed on me as I approached the nearest tent. A flicker of something, like dread, fluttered in my chest as I reached for the zipper. "I'm going to open up," I warned, my hand unsteady. The tent interior was a portrait of orderliness, sleeping bags neatly rolled, provisions tucked away, no sign of hasty departure or struggle. It was as if the campers had simply vanished, leaving behind a tableau of an interrupted life. The embers of their last fire were cold, and the low hum of insects was the only soundtrack. With methodical precision, I checked each tent, finding the same unsettling meticulousness. A sense of wrongness settled over me like a cloud, casting a shadow over the sun-dappled ground. Something about this place, about today, felt off-kilter. I was no stranger to the occasional bout of intuition, the ranger's sixth sense that something in the woods was amiss. This time, it screamed at me, a silent alarm that rang clear as a bell in my mind. By the time I re-zipped the final tent, my decision was made. I would return to the trailhead, check for vehicles. Perhaps they'd gone into town, I reasoned. But as I made my way back, the unease grew. Each rustle in the underbrush, each snap of a twig seemed amplified. A chorus of disquiet that sang a warning. I was a man of the wild, a steward of these lands. But in that moment, as the shadows lengthened and a chill descended with the setting sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the one being watched, the one out of place in the untamed vastness of the park. The afternoon waned, light filtering through the towering pines in shards that barely touched the forest floor. I should have been back at the station, filing reports, finishing up paperwork. Instead, I was here, at the edge of a clearing that had no right to be as silent as a grave. I let the engine idle, the soft purr of the truck a stark contrast to the stillness outside. The campsite was just as I'd left it, tents standing sentinel in their neat little row. I should have felt relief at the lack of chaos, but my gut knotted tighter with every passing second. With a sigh, I killed the engine and stepped out, the door shutting with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the trees. The air was different, charged, almost metallic. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into a different world, one that watched and waited with bated breath. Hello? My voice felt thin, devoured by the expansive silence. I walked the perimeter, boots crunching softly on the forest detritus. The campfire was a scatter of charred wood and ash, the remnants of human warmth long since dissipated. The sun dipped lower, a dying ember on the horizon, and shadows gathered with an eagerness that felt almost sentient. I checked my radio, ensuring it was on and within reach. Not that I expected trouble, but the ranger's creed of be prepared was etched deep in my bones. I approached the tents again, unzipping one and peering inside. It was untouched, a still life of what should have been a bustling campsite. I re-zipped it, a whisper of nylon the only sound in a world gone mute. The forest had always been a living thing, full of whispers and rustles, the occasional snap of a branch, a comforting reminder of its vitality. But now, it was as if every creature, every insect had to hold its breath, and then, in an instant, it happened. The silence broke, but not with the return of life's symphony. No, it was the absence of sound that marked the change, a silence so profound, so complete, it felt like a shroud. I froze, every sense straining against the unnatural quiet. My hand drifted to the canister of bear spray on my belt, the weight of it cold and reassuring against my palm. I scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of life. But there was nothing, just the endless expanse of green and the growing dread that I was not alone. That's when I heard it. The softest whisper of a footfall, a muted crunch that sent a shiver down my spine. It was deliberate, a slow, measured step that was too heavy to belong to any forest creature I knew. I pivoted, the bear spray raised in a silent threat. "Show yourself," I demanded, the authority of my position a thin veneer over the throb of my racing heart. The steps continued, a slow circling of predator and prey. I was no stranger to the dangers of the wild, but this was different. This was a dance with something unknown, something that defied the natural order I had come to know. As the light faded and the forest closed in, I knew I had to make a choice. Wait for the unseen to reveal itself, or retreat to the safety of the trailhead. With a final look at the silent campsite, I turned my back on the unknown and chose the path that led away from the deepening shadows. But as I walked, I could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes tracking every step, every breath. As night fell like a curtain on the day's disquieting end, dawn broke with a cold clarity. Shards of sunlight cut through the dense canopy, doing little to warm the chill that had settled in my bones. The park, a vast kingdom of green and wild things, had always been my refuge. But since yesterday, it had taken on the menacing air of a crypt. I sat in my truck at the trailhead, the engine idling like a growl in the quiet, staring at the windshield but seeing the abandoned tents. The unease had festered overnight into a hard knot. 5 tents. 5 souls unaccounted for. The solitude of the park now felt like isolation, and the silence of the campsite replayed in my mind a haunting loop. With a grunt, I grabbed the radio. The static crackle was a harsh intrusion. I reported in, providing descriptions and license plate numbers. The replies came back. Locals in their 20s, a weekend getaway with friends who had now vanished into the wilderness. I stuffed the radio back into its cradle and stepped out of the truck, the crisp air biting at my cheeks. My eyes swept the parking area. 4 cars, 1 truck, a tableau untouched since yesterday. A sigh escaped me, fogging the air as I contemplated the next move. I retraced my steps down the trail, the same path I'd taken countless times before, but now each rustle in the underbrush, each snapped twig, seemed loaded with intent. I was a man used to tracking, used to being the predator, not the prey. Yet the feeling of being watched clung to me like a second skin I couldn't shake. Reaching the campsite, I found it as I'd left it, eerily pristine. The tents stood mute against the encroaching shadows. My hand hovered over the zipper of the nearest tent. Hesitation was a bitter taste in my mouth. I could feel the day's end approaching, the light waning, the forest preparing for its nocturnal secrets. The silence was suffocating, the lack of human noise, the absence of laughter and life. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. My call for assistance earlier had been a decision made with reluctance, but as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in strokes of fire and blood, I knew it was the right one. As the twilight deepened, a primeval instinct screamed within me. Something was wrong. Something beyond the scope of missing campers and abandoned gear. I was no longer a guardian of the park. I had become part of a darker narrative, one written in the unseen and the unknown. I unholstered the bear spray, the canister cool and solid in my grip. I'd faced down charging elk, stared into the yellow eyes of mountain lions. But this was a fear without a face, a threat that slithered through the underbrush of my mind, leaving trails of dread. The first star blinked into existence as I made my decision. The campsite gave me nothing, the forest even less, so I would have to return to the station to mount a proper search. The night was no time to challenge the unknown. But as I turned to leave, a branch snapped with the sharpness of a gunshot, and the forest fell deathly silent once more. The sense of being hunted, of being prey, was a mantle heavy on my shoulders as I made my way back to the trailhead. The darkness at my heels and the weight of the missing like a shroud upon the land. The sun shouldered its way above the horizon, spilling a pale light that did little to warm the chill in my marrow. I hadn't slept. Couldn't, even if I tried. The station was abuzz with activity, a stark contrast to the uneasy stillness of the woods. I sipped bitter coffee, watching the steam rise like specters into the cold morning air. The faces around me were taut with concern, the weight of the missing campers a silent drumbeat in everyone's mind. A specialist tracker had been called in, a wiry woman with eyes like flint, and a gait was all business. We huddled over maps spread on the hood of a cruiser, her finger tracing the trails with a predatory precision. I felt the pull, the need to get back out there, to find answers, to find them. With the tracker leading, we made our way to the campsite. The tents looked forlorn in the morning light, a tableau of abandonment that was at odds with the natural beauty surrounding us. I recounted the events of the previous day, my voice sounding hollow in the crisp air. The tracker moved with a silence that seemed to resonate with the forest. We found nothing new at the campsite, no signs of struggle, no traces of their passage. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and taken them. I watched her crouch, examining the ground. Her movements were precise, almost reverent. She paused, looked up, and met my gaze. "We're not alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We pushed further into the woods, away from the campsite, away from the trail. It wasn't long before the tracker held up a hand, her body tense. There was a cave ahead, hidden by the foliage, its mouth open like a dark wound on the mountainside. We approached with caution, the air growing colder as we neared the entrance. A fetid smell wafted from the darkness, the scent of decay. The tracker signaled for me to follow, and we entered the cave, the beams from our flashlights cutting through the blackness. What we found within stopped me cold, a grisly scene, the remnants of violence etched into the very stone. Bones, some fresh, some old, littered the ground. The walls were painted with the evidence of savagery, and in the depths of the cave, we saw it. The creature was an aberration, a thing of nightmares made flesh. It was hulking and misshapen, its eyes reflecting our lights with a malevolent intelligence. It moved with startling speed, its growl a visceral thing that seemed to vibrate through the stone beneath our feet. We fought. The tracker was thrown aside like a rag doll, her screams echoing off the walls. I sprayed the creature with bear mace, but it only seemed to enrage it further. The cave became a blur of movement and terror. I remember the cold shock of falling, the creature's breath hot on my neck, and then darkness as I hit the ground. When I came to, the creature was gone. The tracker was silent, and the weight of the dead pressed in around me. I scrambled to my feet, my mind a whirl of panic and fear. The cave, once merely a structure of stone, had become a tomb, a testament to the brutal reality that sometimes the wild is not just indifferent, but cruel, sentient. My consciousness clawed its way back, a reluctant swimmer surfacing from the depths of a dark, cold lake. Pain lanced through my ribs with each ragged breath, a stark reminder of the creature's power. The tracker lay still, barely rising, a grim tapestry of our struggle against the beast, etched in the dirt and blood around us. The cave was a cathedral of horrors. Its walls wept with the blood of the creature's prey. The stench of death was omnipresent, an assault on the senses that threatened to overwhelm me. We were in the belly of the beast, both literally and figuratively. With effort, I propped myself up against the cold stone, my flashlight's beam a feeble protest against the enveloping darkness. The silence of the cave was absolute, a pressing force that seemed eager to swallow any noise we might make. But the silence was a lie. I realized it was the creature's accomplice, hiding its movements, masking its intentions. The tracker's eyes flickered open, confusion and fear warring in their depths before settling into a determined glare. We shared a nod, a silent agreement that we were not yet done, that we would not go quietly into that dark night. We moved, our bodies protesting, a symphony of aches and sharp stabs of pain. We had to find the hiker, the one we had seen moving in the pit. The pit, a grave not yet sealed, a place of waiting for those the creature had chosen to toy with before the end. Our search was methodical, born of a desperation that sharpened our senses. We found her, the hiker. Her eyes wide with terror and relief, we fashioned a rope from the detritus of the cave, clothing torn from the bodies of the less fortunate. She was weak, but alive, and that was a victory against the darkness. We were not out of the creature's woods yet, though. It returned, a looming nightmare, its visage a grotesque mockery of nature. Its eyes held an intelligence that spoke of a malevolent awareness, a knowing that went beyond animal instinct. The fight was brutal, a dance with death in the pale light of our flashlights. I remember the sound of my own breath, ragged and frantic, as I faced the monstrosity. It was a battle not just for life, but for sanity, against the realization that such things walked in the same world I had once thought I understood. In the end, it was a rock, a simple, unassuming weapon, wielded with the last vestiges of my strength, that turned the tide. The creature reeled, its roar a sound that would haunt my dreams for years to come. And then it was on me, its weight a mountain, its breath a gale of rot and malice. But the creature was wounded, its movements sluggish. With a cry that was half scream, half defiant roar, I fought. The beast faltered, stumbled, and then with a final effort I drove it off, sending it crashing into the darkness. We collapsed, the hiker, the tracker, and I, a tangle of limbs and exhaustion. The danger was not yet past, but for a moment we could breathe, could allow ourselves the luxury of hope. Outside, the park was waking up, sunlight creeping across the land. But in the cave, we grappled with the aftermath of our encounter. The reality that the world was far stranger and more terrifying than we had ever imagined. The aftermath felt like walking through a dream, the kind that lingers at the edges of your waking mind, too tenacious to be dismissed by the morning light. The creature lay still, a mass of fur and flesh that no longer inspired fear, just a profound sense of sorrow for the lives it had taken. I emerged from the cave into the blinding light of a new day, the air fresh with the scent of pine and the earthy musk of the forest. The rescue teams had arrived, a flurry of motion and urgent voices. I watched them, their faces a blend of relief and horror as they took in the scene, the scattered remnants of the campers, the silence of the tracker, the ragged survivors we were. They asked questions, their notebooks ready to document the unbelievable. I recounted the events, my voice flat, the words tasting of dust and disbelief. The surviving hiker was whisked away on a stretcher, her eyes meeting mine in a silent thank you. I nodded, a gesture of feeble acknowledgement of the bond formed in the shadow of death. I sat on the bumper of an ambulance, the world around me a cacophony of radio chatter and boots on the ground. The head ranger approached, his expression a mix of concern and something akin to pride. "You did good," he said, though the words felt hollow against the backdrop of such loss. The report they handed me was a litany of names, each a life snuffed out in the prime of its existence, 26 in total, including the brave tracker who had fought alongside me. The creature, they speculated, was some aberration, a twist of nature's design that defied explanation. But in the end, it was dead, and with it, died the nightmare that had gripped the park. I returned to the job, to the routine of trails and tourists, but something fundamental had shifted. The knife I had used to defend us against the creature rested heavy on my hip, its blades stained with the evidence of our struggle. I hadn't cleaned it, a silent tribute to those who hadn't made it out, and a reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknown. I carried more than just the knife now, a .44 Magnum, a weight on my other hip, a concession to the newfound knowledge that wild held more than just beauty and tranquility. It was a burden I accepted, the weight of it a constant companion as I patrolled the same trails, watched over the same vistas. I became something new in the wake of that encounter. A guardian, not just of the park and its visitors, but of the thin veneer that separates civilization from the wild chaos that lurks in the uncharted shadows. Each rustle in the underbrush, every snapped twig, now held the possibility of hidden dangers. But I was ready to protect, to serve, and if necessary, to confront the darkness. The creature had changed me, honed me into something harder, more vigilant. I was no longer just a park ranger. I was a sentinel at the edge of a mysterious and untamed world, forever watching, forever waiting. I pulled my truck into the airport's short-term parking lot, the gravel crunching under the tires like dry bones. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out like the years since I'd last seen Riker, my nephew, a city boy, born and bred, but with a yearning for the great outdoors that I could only attribute to some dormant family gene. The terminal doors slid open and there he was, a backpack slung over one shoulder and a look of weary excitement on his face. He'd grown taller, his features more defined, but the youthful glint in his eyes was as familiar as the mountain trails I called home. "Uncle," he shouted, dropping his bag and rushing toward me. I braced myself for the impact of a bear hug. "Man, it's been too long." "Sure has, kid," I said, patting him on the back. "You ready for a week in the wild?" Born ready, he grinned, retrieving his bag. The drive back to my trailer was filled with talk of college, jobs, and the mundane intricacies of city life. I listened, nodding at the right moments, but my mind was on the week ahead. The Appalachian Mountains were a different beast altogether, beautiful but unforgiving, like a siren you couldn't ignore, even when you knew better. We reached the trailer as darkness settled in, the outline of the mountains barely visible against the night sky. I fired up the grill, the sizzle of steak filling the air with a rustic aroma, potatoes wrapped in foil cooked on the side, a humble but hearty meal for the journey ahead. "So what's the plan?" Riker asked, digging into his steak with gusto. "We'll hit the trail first thing tomorrow," I said. "Got a few spots in mind that offer the best views and a good challenge." "Can't wait," he replied, his eyes lighting up at the prospect. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted from the mundane to the mysterious. The mountains had their own set of rules, a code that every hiker should know, but few ever did. I could see the skepticism in Riker's eyes, a city-bred disbelief in the inexplicable, but he'd learn. They all did. "Hey," I said as he got up to retire for the night, "make sure you close the curtains in your room, all right?" He looked puzzled. We're in the middle of nowhere, Uncle. Who's going to be peeping through the windows?" "Just trust me on this one," I said, my voice tinged with a seriousness that made him pause. "We'll talk about it tomorrow." Riker nodded, his expression a mix of confusion and curiosity. "All right, if you say so." As I lay in bed that night, the curtains tightly drawn, I thought about the red eyes I'd seen years ago peering through the window like a malevolent force from a world we're not supposed to know. I thought about Dan Williams, a fellow ranger who'd laughed off the warnings and paid the price. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mountains were watching us, waiting to see if we'd play by their rules or defy them at our peril. With the dawn of a new day, our journey into the unknown was about to begin. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the trailer, mingling with the crisp morning air that seeped in through the cracks in the windows. I glanced at the clock. 5 a.m. Early, but the mountains didn't wait for anyone. I poured myself a cup and took a sip, the bitterness jolting me awake. I heard Riker stir in the guest room, the creaking of the bed frame cutting through the silence. A few minutes later, he emerged, his eyes still heavy with sleep, but a smile on his face. "Morning, Uncle," he greeted, sniffing the air appreciatively. "That coffee smells like heaven." "Help yourself," I said, nodding toward the pot. "We've got a long day ahead." As Riker poured his coffee, I started on breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, and some toast. Simple, but it'd give us the energy we needed. We ate in companionable silence, both of us eager to hit the trail, but savoring these quiet moments before the day's challenges. Just as we were finishing up, Riker's eyes darted to the sliding glass door leading to the front porch. "Hey, looks like Barkley wants in," he said, getting up and heading toward the door. My heart skipped a beat. "Wait," I yelled, louder than I intended. Riker froze, his hand inches from the door handle. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I motioned for him to follow me into the living room, my eyes never leaving the figure outside the glass door. It looked like Barkley, all right, but something was off. The eyes were too vacant, the posture too stiff. I pointed to the corner of the room where Barkley lay on his dog bed, snoring softly. "That's Barkley," I whispered, my voice tinged with an urgency I couldn't fully explain. "Don't open that door." Riker looked from the real Barkley to the imposter outside, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Is that a stray?" I shook my head. "No. It's something else, something you don't want to invite inside." As if on cue, the figure outside the door vanished, melting into the shadows like a wisp of smoke. Riker let out a shaky breath. "What was that?" "It's hard to explain," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Let's just say the mountains have their own set of rules. One of them is to make damn sure it's really your pet trying to get in." Riker stared at me, his eyes searching for a hint of jest. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "All right, Uncle, I'll remember that." We spent the next half hour getting our gear ready, the atmosphere tinged with a newfound sense of urgency. As I double-checked the straps on my backpack, my thoughts drifted to the red eyes I'd seen years ago, and the doppelganger dog that had just tried to enter my home. The mountains were a place of beauty, but they were also a realm of mysteries that defied explanation. And as we stepped out the door, leaving the safety of my trailer behind, I couldn't help but wonder what other lessons the Appalachian Trail had in store for us. One thing was certain. Riker's education had just begun, and so had our journey into the heart of the unknown. The morning sun was a golden disk in the sky, casting its light over the undulating hills and dense forests of the Appalachian Trail. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was the kind of day that made you grateful to be alive, and even more grateful to be miles away from the concrete jungle. Riker and I set out, our boots crunching on the gravel path that soon gave way to a dirt trail. We were surrounded by towering trees, their leaves forming a canopy that dappled the ground with shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you can only find in the heart of nature. "So what's the plan for today?" Riker asked, his eyes scanning the trail ahead as if expecting it to reveal its secrets. "We'll head up to Eagle Peak," I said. "It's a bit of a climb, but the view from the top is worth every step." Riker grinned, his earlier apprehension replaced by the thrill of adventure. "Lead the way, Uncle." We hiked in companionable silence, each lost in our own thoughts but united by the rhythm of our steps and the beauty that surrounded us. Every now and then, Riker would stop to take a photo or simply stand and breathe, his eyes wide with wonder. It was during one of these moments that I noticed the change. Riker's face grew tense, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the trees around us. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I strained my ears, listening past the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds, and then I heard it, a low, droning sound like a siren but distorted, as if being played through a broken speaker. "We need to get as far away from that noise as possible," I said, my voice tinged with an urgency that made Riker's eyes widen. "But what if it's a weather alert or something?" he protested. "It's not," I said, cutting him off. "Trust me. We need to move, now." We turned and started running, our boots pounding the earth as we retraced our steps. The siren grew louder, then softer, as if playing a cruel game of hide-and-seek. Just when I thought we'd put enough distance between us and the noise, it blared again, this time so close it felt like it was right on top of us. "What the hell?" Riker yelled, his hands clamped over his ears. And then we saw it. A towering structure that looked like an old vine-covered telephone pole, but with speakers at the top. It was moving, its base dragging along the ground as if propelled by some unseen force. The siren wailed, a deafening sound that seemed to shake the very air around us. Without a word, Riker and I turned and bolted, adrenaline fueling our steps as we ran like our lives depended on it. Because they did. As we put distance between us and that monstrosity, the siren's wail grew fainter until it was swallowed by the sounds of the forest. We didn't stop running until we were sure it was gone, our breaths coming in ragged gasps, our bodies drenched in sweat. Riker looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "What was that?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing as I tried to find the words to explain the unexplainable. "Welcome to the Appalachian Trail," I said finally. "You're not in the city anymore." We found a clearing a good distance away from where the siren had nearly cornered us. Our breaths were still ragged, our hearts pounding like drumbeats in a war dance. I set down my backpack and took a swig from my water bottle, the liquid barely quenching the dryness in my throat. Riker was pacing, his eyes darting around as if expecting the trees to come alive. "All right, Uncle. Spill it. What the hell is going on here?" I sighed, looking at him squarely. "Sit down, Riker. We need to have the talk." He hesitated, then sat on a fallen log, his eyes never leaving mine. "Is this where you tell me about the birds and the bees of the Appalachian Trail?" In a manner of speaking, I said, taking a seat beside him. Except these birds and bees can be deadly. I began with the curtains, recounting the night I'd seen those red eyes staring through my window. I told him about Dan Williams, a fellow ranger who'd scoffed at the old tales and ended up a lifeless husk, his face twisted in eternal horror. Riker listened, his eyes widening with each tale. And you're sure this wasn't some animal? Or maybe a trick of the light? I've been a ranger for over 2 decades, I said, my voice tinged with a hardness that made him wince. I know every animal in these parts, and none of them have red eyes that can bore into your soul. He nodded, swallowing hard. Okay, what about that siren thing? What was that? That, I said, choosing my words carefully, is something you don't ever want to get close to. It's a cryptid, a creature that defies explanation. It lures you in with that siren sound, and if it catches you, well, let's just say you don't want to find out. Wrecker looked at me, his eyes searching for a hint of exaggeration. You're serious, aren't you? As a heart attack, I said. There are things in these mountains that defy logic and explanation. Old folks call them spirits, demons, cryptids, whatever you want to name them. They're real and they're dangerous. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, as if exhaling his disbelief. So what do? We follow the rules, I said. Always sleep with your curtains closed. Make sure it's really your pet trying to get in, and never ever get close to that siren. He nodded, his face set in grim determination. Anything else? I hesitated, then decided he was ready. There's a creature called the Wampus Cat, a 6-legged feline bigger than a lion, with eyes that can hypnotize you. If you see it, avoid eye contact at all costs. Riker chuckled, then stopped when he saw my face. You're not joking, are you? No, Riker, I'm not, I said, standing up and shouldering my backpack. These mountains are beautiful, but they're also a minefield of the unexplained. Stick with me, follow the rules, and you'll get through this. He stood up, his eyes meeting mine. I'm with you, Uncle. Let's do this. As we resumed our hike, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. We'd escaped the siren, but the mountains had more lessons to teach, more rules to enforce, and we were just getting started. We made camp as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no artist could ever truly capture. The beauty of it was almost enough to make you forget the dangers lurking in the shadows, almost enough to lull you into a false sense of security. Almost. As Wrecker set up the tent, I gathered firewood, my eyes scanning the darkening woods. The rules were clear in my mind, each one a lifeline that could mean the difference between life and death. But there were other rules, other dangers I hadn't shared with Riker yet. How could I, when I barely understood them myself? Fire's ready, Wrecker called, snapping me out of my thoughts. I returned to camp and sat by the fire, its warmth seeping into my bones as the temperature dropped. Riker joined me, a can of beans in one hand and a look of contentment on his face. This is amazing, Uncle, he said, staring into the flames. I can't believe I've been missing out on this my whole life. It's a different world out here. I know, I said, my eyes meeting his. One that can be both beautiful and terrifying. He nodded, his expression growing serious. You mentioned other dangers earlier. What were you talking about? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. There's a creature known as the Wampus Cat. It's a 6-legged feline larger than any lion or tiger you've ever seen. It has golden eyes that can hypnotize you if you're not careful. Riker chuckled, then stopped when he saw my face. You're not kidding, are you? No, I said, my voice tinged with a gravity that made him sit up straight. Making eye contact with a Wampus Cat can put you in a trance, make you unable to move, and then, well, you become its dinner. He swallowed hard, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. What do we do if we encounter one? Your best bet is to catch it off guard and shoot it, I said, patting the rifle that lay beside me. If you don't have a gun, hide and pray it doesn't find you. Running is not an option. He nodded, his face set in grim determination. Anything else I should know? I hesitated, then decided it was time. There are other things I can't even begin to explain. Lights that dance in the sky but aren't stars, whispers that come from nowhere, shadows that move on their own. The key is to respect the mountains, to understand that we're merely visitors in a world we can't fully comprehend. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a newfound sense of respect. I understand, Uncle. I'll follow the rules, all of them. I nodded, satisfied. Good. That's the only way to survive out here. As we settled into our sleeping bags, the curtains of our tent tightly closed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the mountains were testing us, waiting to see if we'd abide by their rules or pay the price for our ignorance. And as I drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in my mind: the real journey was just beginning, and there was no turning back. The morning sun broke through the canopy of leaves, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. We were up early, packing our gear and dousing the fire, leaving no trace of our presence. The mountains demanded respect, and we gave it willingly, knowing the price of arrogance. We've got a long hike ahead, I said, shouldering my backpack. We'll head down to the valley, then make our way to the waterfall. It's a sight to behold. Wrecker nodded, his eyes shining with anticipation. I can't wait, Uncle. This has been the most incredible experience of my life. I smiled, touched by his enthusiasm, but also wary of the dangers that still lay ahead. It's not over yet, kid. Remember, always stay alert. We set off, the trail winding its way through towering trees and overgrown bushes, each step taking us deeper into the heart of the mountains. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a smell that I'd come to associate with both life and death. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone, that something was watching us from the shadows. I glanced at Wrecker, who seemed blissfully unaware, lost in the beauty of the moment. I envied him, wished I could see the world through his eyes, if only for a moment. And then I heard it, a soft rustling in the bushes, a sound that was almost drowned out by the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves. Almost. I stopped, my hand going to the rifle slung over my shoulder. Did you hear that? Reeker paused, his eyes scanning the trees. Before I could answer, a low growl echoed through the forest, a sound so deep and guttural it seemed to come from the bowels of the earth. I turned my eyes, meeting a pair of golden orbs that glinted from the shadows. Wampus cat, I whispered, my voice tinged with a dread that sent a chill down my spine. Wrecker looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. What do we do? Remember the rules, I said, my eyes never leaving those golden orbs. Avoid eye contact, and whatever you do, don't run. As if sensing our fear, the creature stepped into the light, its six-legged frame towering over us like a demon from the darkest corners of our nightmares. It growled again, a sound that shook us to our very core, then turned and vanished into the forest, leaving us trembling in its wake. We need to go, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Now we resumed our hike, each step weighed down by the knowledge of what lurked in the shadows. And as we made our way through the forest, one thought echoed in my mind. The mountains had let us go, but the rules had changed, the stakes raised in a game we were only beginning to understand. Somewhere in the depths of the Appalachian Trail, the golden eyes of the Wampus cat watched and waited, its growl a chilling reminder that we were merely visitors in a world we could never truly belong to. The end was just the beginning, and the real journey had yet to come. I've been an avid outdoorsman my entire life. I grew up in the hill country of Tennessee, and from the time I was young, my father taught me how to hunt and survive in the woods. It was part of life back home, and everyone had the same shared upbringing in my town. Although I enjoyed hunting as much as any of my friends, it was really the solitude and peacefulness that I found among the trees that really stuck with me as I grew older. When I turned 20, I took a job with the Parks Department at Roan Mountain State Park. It wasn't anything too exciting. I was mostly a glorified tour guide for park visitors, but it gave me the chance to make a living spending my days out in some of the most beautiful wilderness I've ever seen. Even though I lost my job when the budget cuts came in 2020, I still had the experience of 2 years there and a nice bit of qualification on my resume that I could take somewhere else and continue my love affair with nature. Those were some of the fondest memories I have rattling around in my head. But even there, I fell victim to this sinister black cloud that haunts my dreams these days. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, though. It's important for me to write this down. Maybe it'll help me make sense of it all. Maybe it'll help me sleep at night. Maybe not, but it's worth a try. So I'm going to do it while I still can. A year ago, I decided that a change of scenery might do me good. I'd spent most of 2020 working odd jobs while trying to get back into a parks position, but there were no openings anywhere nearby. I had always heard great things about the Pacific Northwest, so I figured I'd take a couple of weeks and head out there to take a look around and see what it's like. In addition to the hike, I had also scheduled an interview with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department before my planned return, so my spirits were high. I spent a month planning the week-long hike into the backcountry of Oregon, anxious to see firsthand the massive redwoods I'd always heard about. Finally, the day came. I stepped off the plane and into the cool Oregonian air, more excited than I'd expected to be, and I knew in my heart that this was going to be a hike I'd never forget, a first step into what I was hoping I could turn into a new chapter of my life. I had no idea how true that would end up being. I spent an hour at baggage pickup and then another at the TSA office, picking up the locked hard case containing the .44 Magnum revolver that my grandfather had given me on my 18th birthday, the same one I always carried into the wilderness. But even slogging through the endless tedium of bureaucracy didn't dampen my enthusiasm, and by the time I had retrieved my car rental and turned the wheels away from the airport and onto the open road, I was smiling again. The moment I left my rented Jeep in the gravel parking lot at the trailhead and stepped into that shadowed, lush greenery of the Pacific Northwest, I was certain I had made the right decision. I had supplies and equipment to last me twice as long as my planned trek, and now I was already considering extending my hike a few days longer than planned. It was early September, and the temperature hovered right around 70-degree Fahrenheit during the day in the sun. Under the dense canopy of the old-growth forest, though, it was probably 10 degrees cooler. Remarkably, a gentle and steady breeze managed to make its way through the trunks of the pines and cedars that surrounded me, keeping the air light and fresh. Within 10 minutes of starting my hike, the small parking lot was lost to view behind me, and I was completely alone, surrounded by this primeval woodland. It was like something out of a Tolkien novel, and I could almost imagine rounding a hilly bend and stumbling upon a small village of hobbits going about their day, oblivious to the outside world I had just left behind. I followed the well-maintained trail for another couple of hours, only encountering one other hiker during that time as they returned in the direction of the trailhead from their own excursion. From their lack of gear, no more substantial than a small shoulder pack, I guess they were just out on a short walk. I saw them take quick note of my considerable backpack and the handgun holstered across my chest and thought for a moment that I saw something like concern flash behind their eyes. It might have been some subtle disapproval at the firearm, but I didn't think so. It wasn't unusual for a hiker to go armed into the bush, especially when alone and in bear country. Regardless, if it had been there at all, it was gone in an instant. We exchanged a friendly nod as we passed each other, but neither of us seemed willing to break the silence with our own words, so we continued along on our separate paths, quickly lost to each other once again. There had only been one other car in the parking lot when I arrived, so I was fairly certain I was unlikely to encounter anyone again for the next week, something I was greatly looking forward to. After another hour, I reached the offshoot trail that I'd been expecting and followed it as it gently turned northerly, growing less distinct and wilder as I went. The air was cool and damp, and the ground beneath my boots was soft and alternated between rocky and muddy as I progressed. Based on my research, this should be the head of the old river trail, which had been used for generations by trappers and fur traders. The course I had plotted would branch again in a couple of days and loop back around until I eventually returned to the main trail a few miles further along. It was a nice, comfortable track and would give me plenty of time to enjoy these woodlands, so different from those in my native Tennessee, and yet so familiar at the same time. For the next 2 days, I immersed myself in the forest, reveling in the solitude and the oneness I felt with all living things around me. I set camp the first night beside a lazy stream that wound from somewhere above and carried icy cold waters, crystal clear and filled with small fish that darted back and forth in its currents. The second night, I sat at my tent beneath an uncommon welcome break in the high canopy above. Through the gap in the thick boughs above me, I watched in awe at the incredible amount of stars that lit the night sky, completely unobstructed by the light pollution that dimmed them to obscurity in my hometown. On the fourth morning, I woke with the dawn, stepping out of my tent and into the heavily shadowed woodlands. I had a quick breakfast of some freeze-dried eggs and sausage, along with a steaming cup of instant coffee, both of which were surprisingly good. After I finished my second cup of coffee and attended to the rest of my morning routines, I broke camp and was moving again within the hour. There was an excited spring in my step as I took to the nearly invisible trail that morning, and the anticipation I'd been trying to keep in check since my arrival I now allowed to run free. This was the day I expected to reach an area of land that had been inexplicably and habitually avoided by trappers over the years, with them often taking a more circuitous route around it, adding a day or more to their travel. It was this very region that had first caught my attention and attracted me to this particular route. I didn't really expect to find anything of note, but the thrill of exploring what was essentially a forbidden zone for those men and women just added a level of mystery to my trip. According to what I'd read, there should have been an old layover cabin somewhere ahead of me, which I expected would provide some great photo opportunities for me, as well as a few more pages to add to my mental scrapbook. Overall, I expected it to be the highlight of my trip, akin to exploring an old Gold Rush-era ghost town. It was early afternoon when I first caught sight of something unusual, something out of place. Through the dense trees ahead of me, I'd been periodically keeping an eye on my GPS, one of the high-end units I'd used on my job back in Tennessee. I'd uploaded my route to it before I left, and following the highlighted path on its LCD display made navigation simple in these strange forests. When the path grew wider and more defined, I was stunned to find that I was approaching what looked like a large cabin of modern construction. As I continued toward it and cleared the tree line, I found myself in a large clearing devoid of trees, but heavily overgrown by brush and young saplings. To my surprise, the familiar brown arrowhead logo of the National Park Service was affixed to the front of the cabin, beside the partially ajar door, faded and somewhat obscured with fuzzy green moss. I was more than a little taken aback when I saw this, since I was certain this area of the wilderness was technically part of Silverfall State Park, and the National Park Service had no presence here. Aside from that, this apparent ranger station appeared to have been abandoned for some time, allowing nature to begin reclaiming the area. It had probably been a year or more since the grounds were last maintained, and within another 2, all traces of the clearing would likely be completely eradicated, with only the decaying cabin and lack of old-growth trees to mark its existence. I double-checked the GPS unit, which had icons for all known ranger stations, but was even more confused when I couldn't find anything within 50 miles of the spot. Noting the location on my GPS, I took a few pictures of the exterior before stepping through the open door into the shadowed room, dimly lit only by a few grimy windows inset into the timber walls. The interior was surprisingly sparse, with only a few desks positioned around the large space and a table in the center. I was astonished when my eyes lit upon an unlocked and open gun cabinet and found the rusting remains of 2 rifles and a shotgun in an otherwise empty rack. I'd seen some reckless and irresponsible things during my time with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, but I'd never expected to find unsecured firearms just left in the open for anyone to stumble across in a ranger station. I grimaced and shook my head in dismay at this apparent display of government waste and neglect, snapping a few more pictures of the interior. If the corrosion hadn't appeared to have long since rendered the weapons non-functioning, I'd have been inclined to carry them out with me and turn them over to the authorities. As it was, I had no interest in adding another 20 pounds to my already heavy load, and they were clearly of no threat to anyone anymore. I just made mention of them to the park rangers when I returned and let them decide what to do. Finding nothing else of interest, I left the cabin and continued my journey, leaving the oddity behind as I once again entered the dense trees. It was only another half hour before I found the remains of the layover cabin I had read about previously, but was disappointed to discover it was little more than a collapsed wooden frame at this point, half buried under the weight of a long dead and fallen cedar. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I think there was a small part of me that imagined the romantic notion of being able to stay in that long-forgotten cabin, not used in 100 years or more. I took a few pictures of the rotting timber frame, but my heart really wasn't in it. I had built this moment up in my mind for the last month, but the reality fell far short of my expectations. Hitching my pack higher on my shoulders, I tucked away my small camera and started once again along the path. Before I had taken more than a handful of steps, however, an aged wooden placard nailed to a tree near the remains of the layover cabin caught my attention. I frowned as I stepped closer, realizing that this had once been some sort of sign, perhaps a navigational aid used by old trappers and fur traders. I could tell that it had been painted at some point, but the pigment had long since been erased by the elements. Still, squinting and looking across its surface at an angle allowed me to make out a few words that had been carved into its now wet, rotted wood. "Turn back. Death waits beyond this point." I scrutinized the surface of the signboard for several minutes to ensure I had read it correctly, but each examination yielded the same results. I could feel that familiar tangle of excitement in the back of my mind and realized that my muted anticipation had not been as diminished as I thought at the less than impressive discovery of the layover cabin. I'd finally reached the area of wilderness shunned by those who had traveled here before me, the place I'd seen referred to as the Legion Gate in multiple images of hand-drawn maps. I'd always wondered how it had come by that name, but eventually dismissed it as one of those archaic peculiarities of a bygone age. Still, it had a ring of menace about it, which only served to tug at my curiosity even more. Another few pictures, and then I was again on my way along the indistinct trail. I noticed as I proceeded further how the ground had begun to dip lower, and I found myself traveling along a gradual descent that helped to quicken my pace. The trees here were growing larger and older than the lands I had passed through over the last few days, and the undergrowth had long since been choked out by the massive trunks of those trees I passed among now. Before long, the trail leveled out, and I felt I was now in the bowl of some great depression in the land, the terrain rising to a gentle ridge visible through the forested expanse surrounding me. The wildlife in this area seemed less prevalent and somehow subdued, the chittering and bird songs now only present as muted echoes in the distance. I could hear the gentle whispers of a nearby stream somewhere off to my left, but kept my feet on the trail. The GPS was having trouble locating my position now, presumably due to the heavy canopy cover overhead, and the last thing I wanted was to wander off the trail and lose my path. I noticed that the breeze that had been my companion throughout my hike was now absent, unable to find its way down the decline or penetrate the dense forestry. Although the atmosphere was still very cool in the ever-darkening shadows of the massive trees, it was no longer fresh and airy, now turning somehow unpleasantly stale and musty. There was a damp scent of organic decay that seemed to pervade every breath, and I felt an odd melancholy now tinting my mood. It was then that I came upon another curious discovery. Ahead, mostly hidden by the crowded forest, I caught sight of a few flashes of bright color. As I proceeded between the massive trunks, soon the colors resolved themselves into something unexpected, a small encampment of bright nylon tents surrounding a central fire pit. Though I couldn't detect the smell of a recent campfire, I still caught the lingering scent of burnt wood loitering in the air. When I grew close enough to get a good look, I subconsciously reached up and unsnapped the strap on my holstered Magnum, my eyes darting around the small clearing. The tents, though still upright, were torn and ravaged, and the occupants were nowhere in sight. Immediately, my thoughts went to a possible bear attack, although I'd heard that grizzly bears had gone extinct in Oregon early in the 20th century. There was still a large population of black bears all over this area. I'd seen fresh scat a few times over the last couple of days, but thankfully hadn't encountered any of the predators yet. I knew that the black bears in Oregon were larger and more dangerous than those I was more familiar with in my home state of Tennessee, and they were a very real threat to people out here. I'd seen the results of a bear attack once during my time with the Park Service, and it was enough to turn my stomach and fuel many sleepless nights afterward. A family of 4 had been camping in a restricted area of the park known for its bear population. Despite the numerous warning signs at the ranger station and those posted all around the area, the father had thought it a great adventure to go off trail and set up camp with his wife and teenage children. There hadn't been much left of them or their camp when we found them a week later. I don't like to think about it. The images are still there sometimes when I close my eyes. Cautiously, I unholstered my revolver and moved as silently as I could towards the camp, eyes never ceasing their scanning of the woods surrounding me, searching for any hint of movement. I doubted that whatever had done this was still nearby. A quick glance at the fire ring showed that it had rained at least once since the last campfire, the remaining ashes compacted and pocked with tiny craters. There had been no rain during my hike, so I thought this was at least a week old or more. I ducked my head into a couple of the dome-style tents, noting that the bedrolls and supplies were still present, including large backpacks bearing the embroidered emblem of the USGS. What the hell was the Geological Survey doing all the way out here? In the last tent, which surprisingly had not sustained the same damage as the others, I found some watertight cases marked with the same USGS emblem. Survey equipment, I guessed. This doesn't make any sense, I said aloud to myself, backing away from the tent and turning a slow circle to take in the whole area. The USGS routinely did tree surveys, so it wasn't uncommon for them to be in the wilderness, but I also knew that they would have traveled armed and wary when camping in bear country. There were 5 two-man tents, not counting the one used to store equipment. So that meant there had been at least 5 of them, and possibly as many as 10. I couldn't imagine a bear or even a family group being able to take them. Hell, with that many armed people, I can't imagine any of them would have been taken. The only explanation I could think of was that perhaps one of them had been hurt, and the entire group called for a helicopter rescue, leaving their equipment and supplies behind. The tents could very well have been torn apart after they were extracted. There wasn't anything really to indicate an attack. No blood, no bodies, no pieces of bodies. They were just torn tents and the mysterious lack of occupants. Additionally, I could find none of the distinctive claw-tip bear prints that I would have expected had there been an attack. In fact, aside from the numerous boot prints in the soft earth, the only animal tracks I could find around the campsite were those of cloven-hoofed animals, likely a large deer or elk. Those prints were prevalent through the camp, so I suspected the animal had wandered through in search of food at some point after it had been abandoned. Regardless, this new discovery, combined with the general oppressive feel of the whole place, had sapped the enthusiasm from me. I didn't feel the same thrill of intrigue I had previously, and now just wanted to be away from this place. I had a satellite messenger in my pack. I could cut this whole trip short and report my findings, calling for a rescue in the process. The satellite messenger was like a PLB, a personal locator beacon, except it had the added capability of sending short text messages in addition to issuing an SOS signal. The only drawback was that it required a greater view of the sky than a PLB did, and I was certain that if my GPS wasn't receiving a signal, the messenger wouldn't either. I holstered the handgun and secured the snap. I'd almost forgotten I was still clutching it as I investigated the camp, but there didn't seem to be any immediate danger. Pulling my camera out, I took a photo inventory of the encampment, including the condition and content of the tents, and made note of my last updated coordinates, which were only a few hundred yards distant. When I got back, I'd be sure to pass on the information to the authorities and let them investigate. Hopefully, it would turn out that there was nothing amiss and that the USGS personnel were all accounted for. But in case they were not so fortunate, this information might be valuable to rescue efforts. Satisfied I had done all I could there, I turned my attention once again to the path, leaving the ravaged encampment behind with an uncomfortable and inexplicable feeling of being observed. The trail began to rise as I approached the western edge of the depression and then plateaued. I began to note with curiosity the black and red striped plastic ribbon tied around some of the trunks. I had seen all sorts of tree markers before, including those used by the USGS, but I didn't recall ever seeing any of that particular color combination. I briefly wondered what such a marker could mean to the USGS surveyors, but that thought was abruptly forgotten when I stepped around an exceptionally broad tree and was faced with... Hell, it took me a moment to really even see what I was seeing, as if my mind was rejecting the atrocity of it. When it finally clicked, I staggered, my world going gray, and I felt close to collapsing from the madness laid out before me. The bodies of two men had been stripped naked and lashed upside down to trees on either side of the path. Their bindings appeared to be made of thin black vines or roots and had been clearly made while the men were still alive, as the cords had been drawn so tight as to have split the skin of their calves and ankles, spilling blood up to their legs and torsos. Their arms were spread out to either side and bound to a crossbeam made from what looked to be the repurposed branches of a tree in a grotesque and twisted abomination of a crucifixion. This was not the worst of it, though, not by far. Their abdomens had been brutally torn open and emptied of their organs, which had been unceremoniously discarded at the base of the trees in a pink-gray pile of viscera that still glistened in the muted afternoon light. Someone had then stuffed them full of pine needles and leaves, to the point that the bodies were both straining with bloat, and crimson-stained vegetation protruded from the cavities. Their blood had painted their shoulders and heads completely red and dried and clumped in their dangling hair. My eyes dropped lower to their faces, and I saw that the men's eyes had been savagely torn out as well, and their empty sockets and gaping mouths were likewise stuffed full of forest detritus to the point of overflowing. At that moment, a foul wind rose, and upon it, I thought I could just make out the haunting tones of an inhuman whisper reaching for my ears, with a language never meant for the voices of men. Again, the world shifted before me, and I took a clumsy step backward in shock, my feet dangling and dropping me hard on my tailbone. I sat there for a long moment, chest heaving and heart pounding in my ears, before a voice in the back of my mind screamed at me to get back on my feet and run. My senses returned then, and I was only too glad to oblige. I leapt to my feet and ran with every ounce of strength I had, passing between the two obscene figures and racing along the overgrown path. I had only covered 50 long strides before breaking abruptly out of the dense tree line and into a broad glade nearly 75 yards across. Unbelievably, even this large clearing was not enough to provide a break in the unrelenting canopy above, a fact I noted subconsciously even as my eyes fell upon the new depraved scene before me. The center of the expanse contained a single odd tree with oddly smooth and blackened bark, 10 feet in diameter, which had been felled and now lay upon the ground. Its length extended from the center of the clearing and stretched beyond the tree line far enough that I couldn't see where it ended. Seated in a circle surrounding the great stump were 6 more figures, 4 men and 2 women, all stripped naked and seated in a cross-legged fashion, leaning forward with their hands outstretched and resting at the top of the smooth surface like it was a massive round table at which they prayed. Scraps of their U.S. uniforms littered the area, torn to rags and cast aside chaotically around them. Their naked backs were hashed with bleeding cuts as if made by razors, and I could almost recognize the patterns in their mangled flesh that Rec called long-forgotten runes or the letters of some unrecognizable language. I stepped forward almost unwillingly in a daze, forcing my feet to carry me closer to the obscene congregation. Unlike the other bodies I'd found previously, these men and women seemed to still be alive, swaying minutely as if joined in some communal and silent chant. As I closed to within a dozen yards of the massive remains of the stump, my eyes were drawn to its surface, patterned with thousands upon thousands of tightly packed growth rings, each seeming no longer than the width of a needle. For an incongruous moment, my thoughts turned to astonishment, both at the incredibly slow growth this tree must have incurred, as well as at the impossible age that the rings implied. As my gaze swept across its saw-scarred top, I realized that the entire center of the tree, the size of a manhole cover, was black as pitch and sickly hollow, as if the tree had been burned from within thousands of years ago, leaving a void that surely should have killed it. Somehow, inexplicably, it had survived and continued to grow, year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium, until now. Looking around the discarded clearing, I observed some discarded equipment scattered about and was surprised to find 2 long-bladed chainsaws nearly hidden by the knee-high grass. Some small part of my brain to reason why the USGS would travel all this way to remove this ancient tree. But the question was a small one, and was quickly eclipsed when I looked closer at the men and women. Their eyes were gone, but unlike their companions I'd found earlier, they had not been torn out, but rather scorched from their skulls by some intense flame. It was as if someone had taken a road flare to each of them, and I could see clearly the blackened flesh surrounding the empty and cauterized sockets. Their mouths gaped open limply, wider than unbroken jaws should have permitted, and I couldn't imagine the pain that must have even now racked their bodies. But if they felt anything, they showed no sign of it. Their eyeless gazes were fixed on that black abyss in the center of the impossible base. I crept closer, my right hand moving to rest on the butt of my holstered magnum, and my left reaching out unbidden to the closest of them, a young woman with short brown hair and a slight build. I didn't want to touch her. Didn't want to touch any of them, but I couldn't overcome this need to understand and to try to help them if I could. The moment my fingers made contact with the feverishly hot skin of her shoulder, I knew I had made a mistake. At once, the circle of men and women ceased their movement, and the one I had reached out to turned her sightless gaze to meet my own. A chill rippled like cold lightning through my veins. In that moment, I knew there was nothing of life left in any of them. I didn't understand what was happening, but no humanity remained in their faces, as if they were no more than empty husks or damaged automatons, endlessly repeating the last command they had been given. All thoughts vanished when she started screaming. Though it was horrific, the sound of the damned, or of a demon, it was pitched higher than I would have thought possible, and seemed to reverberate through the forest around us. The air shook and vibrated with its assault, and I clamped my hands over my ears to try to dampen the hellish wail. I could feel my consciousness start to escape me, felt the trickles of blood from my ears slip between my fingers, but still, the scream continued. It came ceaselessly, without pause, without breath, without mercy. I stumbled away, vomiting into the grass as I fled. My ears burned with a pain I couldn't have imagined until suddenly everything went silent. My vision blurred, and a ripping ache went through my brain like a white-hot brand. That was the last sound I ever heard. Somehow, my directionless flight led me beyond the far side of the clearing and into the tree line. All thoughts were gone as my body operated on base instinct, survival. My feet ran without command, my hands pushed aside underbrush and branches alike, without direction. I don't know how long I fled. Minutes, hours. I only remember emerging from the forest into a wide open field and into the bright warmth of late afternoon sunlight. Somehow, my fingers found the satellite messenger still clipped to my pack, and I activated the SOS beacon. After that, I only have fragmented memories of falling to the ground and later of being transported in a rescue helicopter. Later still were the memories of the hospital, of the doctors, and then of the mental institution. That was a year ago, and I've made great strides since then. My vision has mostly returned in my right eye, though I have little more than blurry shadows in the other. My hearing is gone, and the doctors tell me there is no hope for recovery there. Whatever damage was done had been severe enough to nearly liquefy the nerves, eardrum, and cochlea in each ear. My mind is a bit fragile still, and I have to be careful about forcing myself to recall memories of that day. Sometimes, like now, as I write this, I can distance myself from it, pretend like it is just a story that I'm telling about someone else. But if I push too hard or force myself to accept that this actually happened to me, I will suffer a grand mal seizure and fall into a catatonic state for days on end. I gave my story to the authorities, along with the GPS tracking and my camera. I'm told that they spent a month combing those woods using my GPS data to try to find the locations I told them about. They found the old ranger station, and it sounds like it's a mystery even to them. They also found the USGS campsite, just as I described it, but that's it. No bodies, no black-skinned tree old enough to have seen the dawn of mankind, no eyeless USGS surveyors, nothing. They gave up the search after 2 of their rangers went missing, deeming the area too dangerous to continue search and rescue operations. The old river trail is now restricted, and the area known as Legion Gate has been enclosed with miles of tall chain-link fence topped with razor wire. I'm told it's to prevent anyone else from falling victim to an extremely dangerous natural environment, as they've termed it. I don't go out into the woods anymore. I get anxious and suffer severe panic attacks if I even drive too close to a forested area. My hands get clammy and my breathing starts to hitch. If I turn on the TV and see an image of a tree line, I tense up. I've since moved to a metropolitan area in the Southwest, surrounded by hundreds of miles of concrete and desert. I'm on permanent disability now and do part-time work at a local retail shop to keep busy, but it hasn't left me completely. I can still hear the scream. Why can I still hear the scream? What do you know about Station 21? Asked Len Gibson, the grizzled old forest ranger who was driving me out to my new posting. I shrugged. Not much. I spent most of my time with the Forest Service out west and just transferred to the East Coast recently. This is my first posting out here. He grunted, wrestling with the steering wheel of the old 4-wheel drive pickup as it bucked over the unused trail, heavy underbrush, and thick trees passing dangerously close on either side. The road was narrow, barely wide enough to accommodate the time-worn truck, and he was driving a bit faster than I was comfortable with. I'm surprised they assigned rangers to it, though. Seems pretty remote, I said. We've been driving for a couple of hours on this trail already, and the lonely stretch of paved road we'd left earlier was little more than a distant memory at this point. Used to be a fairly popular long hike trail that ran near it, and the department wanted to make sure we had a presence out here in case anyone got in trouble, he said, never taking his eyes off the path ahead. It was a pretty technical trail. It was pretty common for city folk to underestimate the difficulty or the risk. I frowned briefly. Used to be. It's not in use anymore. Gibson shook his head and spat out the open window. Yeah, too many people were getting injured on it. When a couple of them went missing entirely, the department decided it was too dangerous to maintain it as a sanctioned trail. Let it go to seed. It's tough to even spot anymore unless you know what you're looking for. You'll find an old rope bridge near the cabin. That's about the only thing that'll let you know it existed at all. Then why maintain a posting here? I asked. He spared a quick glance at me and said, You know the saying, if there's a station, there's a ranger. They'll probably get around to decommissioning it at some point, but for now. At that moment, we rounded a bend in the trail and the station came into view. It was built to look like a rustic log cabin and was planted in the middle of a depressed area of the surrounding forest, the gentle ridges creating a natural bowl. The trees here were dense and somehow forbidding, and the unkempt limbs, heavy with gray tendrils of Spanish moss, reached over the cabin and crowded the edges of the modest clearing. The entire area was a lush green, heavily shadowed by the canopy above, and the air was thick with the sense of the deep bush. He used the open clearing to turn the truck around and stopped it in front of the wooden door emblazoned with the Forestry Service logo. Throwing it into park, he turned in his seat and looked at me expectantly. Not staying a while? I asked, opening my door and grabbing my overflowing duffel bag from the bed. Nope, he said, shaking his head. My job is to transport rangers in and out of their postings around here. Used to be that each ranger would have their own assigned vehicle, but the budget doesn't support that anymore. I stepped back from the truck and shut the door, throwing the duffel over my shoulder. Where's the guy I'm relieving? I asked, looking around. That's Ed Marsh. Brought him out here a month ago, same as I brought you a week ago. The guy who does the supply runs came out here and found the station empty, he said, something unspoken behind his light gray eyes. So what? He just disappeared? I asked disbelievingly. The old ranger scratched at the 3-day growth of white stubble on his cheek, as if trying to figure out how to phrase his answer. Look, Miller, you seem like a nice guy. There aren't too many things in this area that'll threaten a man, aside from maybe a copperhead or the odd black bear. But neither of them are too common here. The truth is, some men just aren't built for the solitude and isolation up here. Ed Marsh seems solid enough, but he wouldn't be the first ranger to just up and leave his posting at Station 21. I took another glance around the area before turning back to Gibson, patting the bulging canvas slung over my shoulder. Well, I got plenty of books to occupy my time. I brought my camera, so I expect I'll be able to add some really good shots to my portfolio. He paused a moment before ducking his head in an amiable nod and barking a laugh. That's good, kid. Keep yourself busy, and the month will fly by. Before you know it, Elliot Barnes will be out here in a week to resupply you, but you should have plenty still in the cabin to carry you over. I nodded my thanks to him and stepped back from the pickup as he threw it into gear and headed back off the way we'd come. I watched the tan and maroon 4x4 until it was lost to view, the sounds of its whining engine lost to the trees. I found myself alone in front of the cabin, glad to be on solid ground after the morning's less than smooth ride out here. The sounds of nature, which had momentarily been muted when we arrived, slowly returned in force, the chittering of squirrels and chipmunks somehow in harmony with the birdsong in the treetops. The air was cool and still, as I stepped onto the wooden porch that spanned the front of the cabin. I turned the knob and pushed the door inward. The interior of the station was Spartan and neat, divided into a small office space for visitors and a slightly larger living space for the ranger. I walked around the low wooden counter and through the open doorway that led to my new accommodations for the next month. It was relatively neat and organized. The ranger who'd been posted here before me looked to have been fairly settled into his posting. I wondered briefly why a forest ranger accustomed to spending his time alone in the forest would decide one day to just pick up and leave. The trail back to the main road wasn't a difficult one to hike, but it was a long one. Of course, Ed Marsh had probably called a friend to come out and pick him up, but it still didn't make any sense. Regardless, it was a mystery for another day. The sun was beginning to set, and I still needed to get settled in and set for the night. By the time I had unpacked my stuff and started a fire in the cobblestone fireplace, night had fallen. The silence of the woodlands around me was a familiar comfort, different from my previous post in the Pacific Northwest, yet somehow the same. The air began to chill with the coming of night, and I made my way around the cabin, locking the front door to prevent any curious critters from finding their way inside during the night. I left the windows open for a bit for the airflow and settled comfortably in a cushioned chair in front of the crackling flames with a bit of Johnny Walker I'd carefully packed, just enjoying the moment, lost in my thoughts. My eyes wandered aimlessly around the room, taking in my new surroundings. I stopped when they settled upon some crumpled pieces of paper that had been discarded and were hiding in the corner of the room near the bed. With a grunt of interest, I stood from the chair and took another swallow of the scotch, heading over and snatching the papers up from the floor. Returning to my seat in front of the fireplace, I set the glass on the low-end table to my right and smoothed the papers out on my knee. They looked like they had been torn out of a bound notebook, perhaps a composition book or journal, and the handwriting was in a sloppy cursive written in black ink. I raised my eyebrows in interest when I read the first page. Dropped off today by Ranger Gibson. Thought I was going to piss myself for the last half hour with the drive. I think he had every rock and route on that trail. The old bastard tried to spook me with the history of Station 21, but I'm not a rookie. I know how things are for new postings. I have to admit that Station 21 is a bit of a mystery, but it just adds to the charm of the place. I'll have plenty of time to get familiar with it. I flipped to the next page. Some sort of animal was outside the cabin last night. I'm glad I thought to close the door. The last thing I want is to wake up to a black bear rooting around in my provisions. Amen to that, I thought. Another page. I swear to Christ, if that old bastard is trying to scare me, I'm going to beat his ass. I don't have any interest in playing any games and even less interest in going out in the middle of the night in the rain. I didn't think that Gibson seemed like the type of person to haze a new guy, but what did I know? I turned to the next page and kept reading. Okay, I'm not sure what the hell that was outside last night, but I don't think it was Gibson. There are no tire tracks anywhere nearby, and I can't find any boot prints in the mud this morning. Whatever it was too big to be a raccoon. Maybe a black bear, I guess. Need to be sure to keep things locked up. I'm starting to wish they issued rifles out here. The last page was the strangest of the bunch. I think I saw it today out by the ravine, but I think it saw me too. I don't think it likes it when you notice it, because it sure took notice of me pretty damn quick after I spotted it. Need to be more careful. I reread the pages a few more times, pouring myself a bit more of the scotch and reclining back in the chair as I pondered what I had read. I must have drifted off at some point because I awoke to the sound of rain and thunder. The fire had died down to embers, and a chill had replaced the comfortable warmth that it provided. I stood from my chair and walked over to the window, looking out into the dark at the rain. Even with the heavy cloud cover, I could still make out the dim shapes of the trees beyond the clearing in front of the cabin. A gust of wind rose and blew the misting rain into my face through the screen. Not wanting to have to spend the next morning trying to dry everything out, I began walking around all the windows and closing them, lamenting the loss of fresh air they permitted into the cabin's interior. I moved to the last window, the one nearest the main entrance to the ranger station, and froze. My brow creased, and I squinted into the rainy darkness. I was sure I had seen a shape moving along the tree line, but lost it when the storm intensified briefly and obscured my view. Staring into the darkness for a long minute, I reluctantly backed away and closed the last window, shaking off the uncomfortable feeling as best I could before moving over to the bed and dropping into it without bothering to undress. Sleep quickly took me, and my dreams were filled with strange and unseen shapes hiding in the shadows at the edge of my awareness. By the time I rolled out of bed the next morning, all remnants of the previous night's unease had vanished, and my mood was heightened as I faced my first morning at my new post. After a quick breakfast and a change into a fresh uniform, I threw open all the windows before stepping out of the cabin and into the damp, early morning air. I dug my camera out of its case and threw a strap over my head as I set out. The first thing I wanted to do was take a look around the area and get a sense of my surroundings. Gibson had told me there was an old rope bridge that led to the decommissioned trail nearby, and after a quick look at the area map in the ranger's office, I figured that it was only 100 yards or so north of the station. I figured that would be as good a place as any to start and would probably provide some nice opportunities to get some dynamic shots. My narrow trail led into the tree line to my right as I stepped off the wooden porch and into the ankle-high grass of the clearing. A small sign with a white arrow. The white arrow was posted near it with a brief description: Graham's Ravine. With a spring in my step, I followed the narrow trail through the trees, embracing the sense of nature that surrounded me. The constant dripping of the previous night's rainwater joined its voice to the native fauna and seemed to push me along. Before long, I emerged from the trail and found myself standing at the edge of a jagged cliff. The grassy ground abruptly gave way to a rocky, vertical face that tumbled down nearly 100 feet to the floor of the ravine below. The base of the gulch was filled with the angry flow of a narrow river, though I suspected that it was likely the storm from the night before that made it so. It was probably ordinarily little more than a meandering creek when the weather was dry. Spanning the ravine was an old and weather-worn rope suspension bridge with gap-toothed wooden planks beckoning for travelers to cross. They didn't look too trustworthy, so I decided to keep my feet on solid ground for today. Perhaps I'd be a little braver another day and try my luck with the bridge. Instead, I raised my camera and removed the lens cap, bringing it up to my eye and taking several pictures of the scene, including one point-of-view shot looking across the bridge itself as if the viewer were to step onto the span. I was pleased with that one. I felt it added a little drama to the rest. After a while, I replaced the lens cap and continued my exploration of the area surrounding the ranger station, eventually finding myself back at the cabin in the waning afternoon light. All in all, it had been a peaceful and pleasant day, and I'd wrap it up with some light chores around the station before calling it a day. That evening, I copied the images from my earlier outing to my tablet and was lazily swiping through them as I picked at my dinner. I reached the set I had taken at the rope bridge and smiled at them. They turned out better than I'd hoped. As expected, the POV shot across the span was the best of them. I wished I had thought to add a little more field of view for added drama, but I could take care of that with editing. I didn't think that would be necessary, though. I was sure I'd end up with hundreds of similar shots by the time I rotated out of this posting. Something in one of the shots of the bridge caught my eye, and I set my plate aside as I zoomed in closer on the image. In the foliage across the ravine, half hidden behind a tree, was what looked like a tall, impossibly thin man. He appeared to be leaning around the tree and staring directly at me. Thinking it must just be a trick of the light as it played upon the undergrowth, I checked the other pictures and gasped out loud, startled at what I saw. In each of the images taken at the ravine, the figure appeared. In the first view, it seemed to be moving slowly among the trees, oblivious to my presence. But then, suddenly, in the next frame, there it was, standing behind the tree and staring directly at my camera, at me. The man was tall. He must have been well over 6 feet and very thin. He appeared to be dressed head to foot in some sort of black cloak or cape, and only his pale, bald head and hands were otherwise visible. Most unsettling, however, were his eyes, which were unusually large and dark, like fist-sized black marbles set into his pale face. I couldn't really make out much more detail than that. He hadn't been the focus of my shot, and there was no way to enhance that area of the image any further. My attempts to zoom in more only succeeded in pixelating the image and obscuring the man. At first, I was more than a little shaken, but then I thought about it more and chided myself for being so easily startled. Sure, the encounter was an unusual one, but Gibson had told me the trail that lay beyond the ravine had been a popular one. Just because the Forestry Service had decided to stop maintaining it didn't mean that adventurous hikers didn't still travel it. That would also explain why the department wanted to maintain a ranger presence out here. If the trail was still being used, even unofficially, they would still want a ranger nearby in case of trouble. It all fit together nicely, and my nerves eased again. Still, a small glass of Johnny Walker was always welcome, so I started a fire and settled in for the night. During the light cleaning I had done that afternoon, I'd found another couple of crumpled pages behind the wastebasket and had set them aside on the end table to review later. Now, as I sat again before the crackling flames, I examined the 2 additional pages and felt the chill of dread climb from the base of my spine as I read the increasingly chaotic script. Something is outside the cabin again. Last night, it wasn't just hiding in the trees anymore. I feel like it's seen me, like it's taking notice of me now. I know how crazy that sounds, but it's the only way I can explain it. Elliot Barnes will be out here in 2 days to resupply me, and I'll leave with him when he gets here. They can find someone else to sit out here in this deserted ranger station. There's no need for any of us to be out here, and I don't think we belong here. I don't think it likes people being here. I don't think it likes to be noticed. I straightened from the hunched position I had unconsciously taken while examining the pages, stretching out the knot that had formed in the muscles of my neck as I stood and glanced over at the darkening windows that ringed the cabin walls. During the day, they provided welcome light and plenty of ventilation to the interior, but now, at night, they made me feel vulnerable. Anything could be outside, looking in at me through any of these windows, and I wouldn't know it. I could be surrounded by watchers on all sides and never have a clue. "Get yourself together, for Christ's sake," I said aloud, shaking myself back to my senses. This was stupid. I had been in areas more remote and dangerous than this before. This was a posting they gave to Rookie Key, simple and safe, difficult to get into too much trouble here. That being said, I didn't hesitate to ensure the front door was locked and secured, and figured tonight I could sleep without the windows being open. Things would look a lot different in the morning. I was starting to agree with my predecessor. A rifle would have gone a long way to setting my mind at ease. Right about then, the rain came again that night, with less fury but greater volume. I tossed and turned in my sleep, never finding a comfortable position. In fact, it was less the mattress and more my imagination keeping sleep at bay. I couldn't coax my mind to quiet and calm itself in the darkness. It insisted on constructing sinister images to keep me awake. When I opened my eyes, it continued making the shapes of the furniture around me into alien and menacing forms. I turned over onto my side with frustration, forcing my eyes closed and focusing on the hissing sound of the rain on the metal roof above me. Normally, it would provide the perfect environment to lull me into a deep and restful sleep, but now it only served to mask the sounds of anything that might be sneaking around outside of the cabin. "Stop it," I told myself angrily, opening my eyes, and I froze as my eyes fell upon the grotesque pale face at the nearest window, staring in at me with some detached and inhuman curiosity. The black eyes were huge and unmoving. Even as I watched, rivulets of rainwater streamed down its face and over them. I could see small tremors in the white skin of its face as it almost seemed to tremble minutely, as if it didn't have full control of its body. Involuntarily, I abruptly sat upright in my bed in shock, and without changing its blank expression, the face somehow seemed to grow agitated, heated. "I don't think it likes to be noticed." Those words from Ed Marsh's pages floated into my mind, and I thought he might be right. In an instant, it had faded away from the window, leaving only blackness in its wake. Was it gone? Was it moving to another window? Was it waiting for me? It wasn't an animal, that much I could tell. If it was a man, I needed to understand what he wanted. If it wasn't a man, I needed to understand what it was. I couldn't stay here for another month with this thing haunting me every day and night, always wondering if and when it would come for me. What if I hadn't awoken when I had? Would it have grown bolder and come inside? I'm going out there. I don't have any weapons other than this can of bear spray. But I have to know. I can't just stay here and wait for it. I can't wait for it to wear me down from exhaustion and lack of sleep. If I'm going to confront it, it needs to be now. I wanted to write this all down before I went out there, just in case. I don't know what's going to happen or what's out there, but I need to know. Hopefully I'll have more information to update this journal in a while. Wish me luck. The preceding pages were discovered in a journal left by the forest ranger I was sent here to relieve. I can't find any trace of him other than his camera and some other personal effects, and the ranger that dropped me off said he just went missing one day. From what he was telling me, that's not exactly an unheard of occurrence at the station. Some people just can't handle the isolation. Reading his journal, it sounds like he was more than a little unhinged and experiencing hallucinations. I've long thought that the Forestry Service needed to institute psychological evaluations before they just send people into the wilderness in complete solitude. One thing that I can agree with my predecessor on, however, is that I need to keep the door locked at night. It sounded like something pretty big was moving around outside in the rain last night. I'm going to set some trail cameras tomorrow, I think, but if I hear it outside again tonight, I'll need to check it out.